All right, and the last part I'm going to talk about is the third option for entering your budget in Martus, which is importing a budget. You can import it through a spreadsheet, which depending on the size of your budgets or just the way you like to work, it can be a lot easier than manually doing this and trying to determine the funding sources and stuff like that. It can be time saving for you, but you need to be comfortable using Excel and definitely comfortable managing files on your computer, and certainly aware of how to identify your program ID, your checkbook ID, and your funding source ID for this to work. If it's not formatted correctly, the import wouldn't work. So we have two options on importing. Below the FY22 budget, one of the buttons you can use is called Export Worksheet. So if we click that, open up the worksheet, I've got the two budget lines in there, so it's already pre-populated those two lines for me, and it's included my budget. It does have maybe about 36 columns that can be used. At the end of this worksheet, those 4 columns are what drives pretty much the entire budget process. This is the checkbook number, the program ID, the funding source, and the account number. So if you were going to use this, these first 4 are virtually meaningless that you'd have to delete and then just use those at the end. And then you can enter your budget with whatever it needs to be. So you can find that here by going to Export Worksheet. You could go to ljstraining.info, go to Martus, and go to the annual budget prep. I do have a shorter video on how to do the budget upload that's there, but I have a link to download the import template that's already formatted, so you don't have to do any of the deleting or any of that. Just has the necessary fields you need to use. So it's cleaned up and should be a little bit easier to use for imports. So a couple options for you, and a video, and when we're through with this one, the recording for this will also be uploaded to the website. So ljstraining.info. But when we have our import sheet, we can begin to prepare our budget here. So if we have multiple funding sources, multiple checkbooks, we might be able to manage some of these things a little bit different or a little bit better. But just know that you would need an Excel spreadsheet for this, one for each of your worksheets. So if you have a revenue fund, casino money, general fund money, and an IHS contract, you would need 4 different Excel spreadsheets that you would have to upload. If you're not sure how to identify like your actual funding source ID, if I get into Intact pretty quickly here, if we go to purchasing, and we're going to add a purchasing item, and when you click the drop down, you'll get whatever program or programs you have access to. The program ID is the 3-digit number. So on our import template, where it asks for program ID, we would put in 100 for the admin attorney's office, or whichever number corresponds to us. My test company also happens to have test as its ID, so test is what I'm using on the import template. Your funding source is split into 2 parts, and the little double hyphen here kind of tells us those 2 different parts. The first part, which would be up to 20 characters, is the ID of the funding source. And then the second half of that is the funding source name. So on that import template, it wants the ID. It wants the first half of those double hyphens. and we would need to make sure it's exact. Any characters that don't match, we would get an error on the template. Same thing with our program ID. Our checkbook, depending on the checkbooks we have access to, is whatever digit the check number is, and then its name. You can see the split with the double hyphens. So it would just want the number 1, 1-1, 104, whatever it is. That's the number we're going to give. And the last thing that it would want is the account number. And it's important because it's the account number, not the line item ID. You know, what I mean by that is if we were looking at travel has 20 item IDs, and that's not one of these numbers wouldn't work. We need to use the actual account number. So the tribe's chart of accounts, if you go to general ledger, you have an option to look at general ledger accounts. This would tell us the account number and the account name. And so if you weren't sure, this is where you would go to find your number for advertising or for office supplies, whatever it is, especially if we're obviously changing or proposing a new budget that didn't exist before. If you know the account number, you can type that here. If you know the title, many of us wouldn't, you could type a percentage sign and type some letters that you think would be in the name. So if we type ADV for advertising and hit enter, it's going to bring up each potential match that has the combination of the letters ADV in it. So there's several for advances, airtime, advertising expense. And so now we might have found the account number we're looking for if we were going to budget advertising. Lynette does add that the revenue will be entered by finance for general, casino, and indirect, and the program monitors enter the revenue for the grants. And that the revenue budget is entered by accounts receivable as deposits are made. Well, not the budget, but the actual amounts received. Okay, so this is how you would find that account number. And on the worksheet, it's only looking for the number. It doesn't care what the account name is. It would come up as an error if we tried to type in there that it's wages or office supplies, any of those things. It wants the actual account number. So if we were going to add additional stuff, and so maybe I have 2 more lines I need to add. And so let's use utilities and office supplies. Those are the 2 numbers I can think of off the top of my head. In those, we're going to have a budget of $200. I'm going to have October of 21 with those amounts. And as I said before, these first 4 numbers, these first 4 columns actually do not matter in this. That's helpful because it gives us the account name with the number. But Martus isn't going to consider that as part of its consideration for import or for the formatting of the spreadsheet. So I'm just going to delete those from my sheet. The notes correspond with the month. If I needed to add a note for each of the budget line items, you know, new water meter or copy paper, something like that, the notes, we can add that here. And now we can save this to our desktop. Use a file name that's sensible to you that you can find easy. Put it on a place where you're going to find it easy. So I'm just going to put this on my desktop. And when we go back to Martus, there's a place here to choose our file. So I just put it right at the desktop so it's easy to find. has that file in there. Now I can import the budget. And now we see the 2 line items I added, utilities and office supplies. Nothing changed with telephone or the miscellaneous income. If I had changed the numbers on that template, it would update those numbers to match what the template says. And now we can see there's a little blue calculator. So if I click on utilities, there's the note I put on that worksheet to match what we're doing. I can save the worksheet, and from there I would be finished, and I can move on to the next worksheet. If I had multiple checkbooks I have access to, so this was checkbook 35, if I had 638 funds or a different checkbook, that's something I would be could move on to now that we're done, and go back to worksheets and find the next one and move towards. So you do have 2 options: download this one or go to ljstraining.info and download the one that's modified to only have what you need for the budget upload. And just make sure, if you have questions on that one, send me an email or send me your sheet. If you're not sure if the import sheet's right, email it to me and I can give it a once over, or let you know if you're having trouble with help you identify what the problem is. If we had this out here, so let's say I was trying to add a travel line item. I didn't have a funding source created yet, but I thought I could just type it here. And we'll say we're gonna have a $500 travel line item here. Save our worksheet, and if I go try to import this new change, it's gonna tell us that there's an error. Row 6 of that worksheet, column 28, test 2022 is not found. So just keep that in mind, that if we use a funding source or any of these things that aren't recognized here, we're going to get that error. And it's usually pretty good at telling us what the error is at top. We know it's row 6, it said, and column 28. And so Z would be 26, 27, 28. We know exactly where the error is and potentially what we have to do. And if I was thinking I needed a new funding source, that's my flag. I got to reach out to the program monitor and get that started before I can go any more forward. Okay.